YouTubers, today's video is a replacement of my RV power cord as well as my portable surge protector. Just before Memorial Day weekend, I'd gone out to the RV to check to see if everything is prepared for guests that were going to be staying in the RV on that weekend. I noticed I hadn't had any power, and so I did some investigation and found that there had been a severe problem with my electrical cord at the point of my surge protector. For some unknown reason, which I kind of suspect it could have been a short in the plug shorted out, causing excessive heat, which melted out the plug and the surge protector, causing the breakers to pop on my main panel. In short, what it did, it fried the cord and the surge protector, so it was totally unusable. Fortunately, the surge protector did protect my box and also the RV, so I didn't have any kind of a fire. Note to all, if you don't have it, get a surge protector. It'll save you a lot of money and a lot of grief. In order to get me through the weekend, since it was a holiday, I removed the old cord and I replaced it with my 30 amp 25-foot extension cord. That kind of got me through the weekend. The surge protector that you can see is something that came after the new cord arrived. Right after the holiday, I received my new 30 amp power cord as well as the 30 amp surge protector. The power cable is all set to install and all trimmed back, with the exception of the individual wires, which have to be trimmed before the installation. To trim the cord ends, you have to take them down about a full inch. And you can either use a regular pair of wire strippers, and what I'm happen to be using here is an old cable stripper that I had from quite a while ago. No matter what you use to strip off that insulation off of the cords, either one will do quite well. The important thing is you want to make sure that you strip off enough for it to be able to connect to the other wires through your wire nuts, and not too little so it won't make the connection at all. You don't want too much off, because if you have too much off, what's going to happen is you're going to have too much exposed cord or exposed wire, which could cause another short while it's in the box. What I ended up doing is that I didn't take quite enough off. I only took off about a half an inch, and then after opening up the box and seeing how much exposed wire I had to connect to, I had to take off another half an inch, which I just used with my regular wire strippers. Oh no, it worked out quite well. So I feel, if anything, maybe a little bit too less wire exposed than too much. The first step I did before disconnecting my temporary cable and installing the new one is I disconnected the ground wire off of my battery. And of course I did this after I unplugged the RV unit from the 30 amp outlet in the front of my garage. I also made sure that I stowed the wires where they would be safe from touching any other kind of metal where they could possibly ground out and cause an electrical failure or shock inside the camper. Another thing I did is I also shut off my propane tank, which happened to be sitting right next to my battery. So I felt pretty confident everything was very safe. After I was assured that all the power and propane was shut off, I removed the access panel to my junction box where my power connections were made. After I had access to the junction box, I just simply loosened the two screws, which removes the cover, and I can get access to the wire nuts where the connections are made. Using a number 2 Phillips screwdriver, I removed the two screws that held the cover over the junction box. Carefully, you got to kind of make sure that you don't lose one of the screws. I dropped one, but I was able to get to it right away. After the cover is off, I pull out the wires, which would be the white, the black, and the green ground wire. Then I remove the wire nuts. I'm going to be reusing those, so I set those aside so I don't lose them. Then I separate the power cord wires from the RV wires so that they don't get tangled up. And it keeps them kind of nice and neat, so I can pull out the old cable. My next step is to loosen up the screws on the strain relief so that I can slide out my cable from the box. Also, there's a little wire guide cable that I removed as well. That made it a little bit more free to pull the cable directly out of the back of the RV. Again, I only loosened the screws on the strain relief. And as far as the clamp, I totally removed that screw, pulled the clamp out, and then put the screw back in the original hole so I wouldn't lose it. Since the screws were so small and I didn't want to you know, over torque them when I installed them, I just used a regular number two Phillips head screwdriver just to remove all the screws. Uh, it just seemed that much easier to use that than a power screwdriver. Once the connections were free, I positioned the cable where I can just pull it straight out of the back of the RV. I also pulled out, and this is no big deal, but there's also a connection, which is a cable that I have whenever I hook up to the internet or to cable when I'm in a long park for a long term. That normally just gets tucked right back in that same spot, and I just leave it there until I need it. Now I'm ready to install the new cable. So I just take the wire ends that I've already stripped off and I carefully put them in through the access hole that goes into the RV. Since I was too lazy to remove the inner panel that gave me better access, I just carefully pushed that cable through until I saw a spot where I can get my hands on the new cable and pull it on through. I made sure I pushed in enough cable so that I could work conveniently uh, with threading that through the new strain relief and making my connections. I didn't put in too much because then it would just kind of get in the way. Once I got it through the uh, wire clamp and through the strain relief, I tightened down the strain relief and I separated my wires and got them ready to make the connections with the wires from the RV itself. Like I said, I did have them a little bit too short, and so I used my wire strippers to kind of lengthen the cut or expose more of the copper wire in my new power cord. Once I tightened down wire clamp, and the strain relief. I separated my three wires, the black, the white, and the green, so that they wouldn't be connected to each other, and it just makes it a little bit easier for me to handle. The little brown wire that that I'm fiddling with, all that is just a USB cable that goes from my router up to my Wi-Fi extender. And I just had to fiddle with that just to kind of get it out of the way. Once I've got everything positioned, then I start making my connections by connecting my black to the black, the white to the white, and the green to the ground, which is the solid copper grounding wire. And once the wire tie or wire nuts are all tightened down, and I feel secure that they're not going to come loose, then it's pretty much all done. And all I really have to do is to neatly tuck the wires aside. So, like I usually have them one in each corner, and that way they don't connect, or there's no chance of it touching each other. So, just a little added, point of safety. Again, once I have all the wire nuts secured, I tuck them in there nice and neat. And like I said, I try to have the black in one corner, the white in another corner, and then of course the ground in another corner. That way, I don't risk any chances of shorts. There is a possibility that they could probably, if the wire knot would happen to shake loose, which I seriously doubt, it could touch the box. But they're very secure, and I don't see anything happening to it. So once I'm satisfied that they're in good position and they're ready to cover, I go ahead and I slip the cover over the top of it. And then with just a couple of twists on each screw, it's all tightened up and ready to go. Once the cover is all secured down to the junction box, the access panel can go back on, and basically you're all done with the connections. Now everything's cleaned up and secured inside the RV. Then I go out and I make my connections back into the battery, which is simply just loosening up my wing nut that I have on the negative ground, putting on my battery ground as well as my accessory ground, and just tightening that down, putting the cover on, and then setting the strap. And also at the same time, I go ahead and I turn on my propane. Sorry about the headshots, but it was kind of unavoidable. I got in the camera lens, but in the meantime, what I'm doing is just go ahead, and I don't like this strap because it's a little bit awkward to work with, but it's harder to loosen than it is to put on. But once I get it on there, it's all right. Once the battery's all hooked up, then I go back and I install my new surge protector. And to double check it before I plug anything into it, I take a look and make sure that I've got two green lights on the top showing I've got good open power. If I've got one on one side, then it means I got an open ground. One on the other side, then I've got like a reverse flow. And then if both lights are out on the bottom, that means that it's totally dead. So, but everything checks out, so I go ahead and I plug in my new power supply cord. Inside check shows 13.5 volts. Everything is working fine. Now, once everything is all done with the new RV cord, I took my extension cord that I had used to as a temporary power cord, and I decided to repair that, so I regained my 25-foot extension cord. I had purchased a replacement male and female receptacles and cut off about 3 or 4 inches off the end of the extension cord because there was some splits right along the side of the insulation of the exposed wires. I didn't want any chance of shortage. So I cut them off, trimmed off some of the shielding on the outside, and then I took about an inch off of the cables or each cord. After cutting back the insulation, I just gave the exposed copper wire a few twists so that they won't be frayed and it makes for a better connection. Again, this time I was using my wire strippers, which seems to work pretty good in this case. I also trim back about 1 to 2 inches of the insulation that wraps around all three wires. At that point, I took my refinished wire ends and pushed it through the rubber strain relief of the new receptacle. After loosening up the screws on each individual wire plug, I went ahead and inserted the end of the wire and tightened down the screws. One thing to remember and to note is that there are instructions, so it tells you exactly what wire goes onto what plug. So if you just follow the instructions, whether it's the male or the female, you'll get through there fine. Yeah, like I said, once I finished making all my connections, I pulled the little clips out and made it a lot easier to install each cord or wire into the receiver part. And then I took my nibs and I trimmed off the ends of what the copper was left sticking out. That kind of cleans it up and there's less chances of anything kind of shorting out on you again. So constantly thinking about shorts. That's short circuits, not short pants. But anyway, once it's all set and ready to go, then I just go ahead and make those connections or put the individual receptacles into the slots where they go to. You can see the instructions are sitting over there on my left, your right, and that tells you exactly where to put the colored wire, what side the white goes on, the black, as well as the green. As long as you lose your man card and read some of the instructions and you're not colorblind, you do just fine as far as making the connections. The next thing I'm doing is just putting the metal strain relief over the top of the polyurethane strain relief or the that wraps around the cable. And then I've got two large screws that I'm going to be sticking through the front of it. Again, I'm using a number 2 Phillips screwdriver and I just tighten them down so that the strain relief will hold that cable from and prevent it from pulling out. Once I've tightened down my strain relief screws, I then put in the 3 screws on this particular plug onto the back side or the front side of the plug that goes into the back, and I start securing that down with my smaller Phillips head screwdriver. I want to be careful not to tighten it too much because I don't want to strip out those screws. Just a good hand tighten is good enough. You don't have to really crank on it. Once you've placed all the screws in the back and tighten them down, I go over it one more time. Just give it a little extra twist to make sure they're nice and secure so there's no water leaks in the future in case of rain. And also I make sure that strain relief is tightened as well. After the final tightening of all the screws, I now have a workable or usable 25-foot extension cord, minus a couple of inches. Once again, the average layman can do this. It doesn't take an electrical engineer because there's instructions for both the male and the female receptacles. Doesn't need much tools, just a small and a larger head Phillips, as well as some wire strippers and a box cutter or utility knife. Oh yes, I also have the wire nips, and I use that to trim off the remnant of the cord where there's a little bit of extra copper showing that I don't want to touch anything to cause it to short out. I hope this kind of helped you out as far as what to do in case you do have a problem with your power supply cord and what your alternative is. If you have attached cable, extension cord will really help you out of a pinch. I hope you enjoyed this installation video, and if you like this video, please hit the thumbs up. If you haven't already, please subscribe. And most of all, thanks for watching.